Willkommen, bienvenue, welcome to Property Quorum. Oh. Well, some of you may have noticed that we're missing one of our members. It's a sad, sad day. He's actually flying away on holiday. That's Chris. Somewhere overhead. But we are joined fabulously by two special guests. We have Mitchell. Welcome. And also Rowan.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Not at all. Property Quorum, as most of you have gathered, is a place where we discuss the ins and outs of what the hell's going on in the property market and the confusing mess that it seems to be, and occasionally bring to light useful ideas, bon mots, and concepts that some of us take away and think, my goodness, I'd never thought of that before. First of all, let me welcome, of course, Hamish McLay, Juliet Baboolal, Rowan Muller, Mitchell Bellenie. I got that right. Good. I'm so sorry. And first of all, I'm going to throw, as normal, Hamish under the bus and say, Hamish, what's all this nonsense about forms?
Oh wow! I'm one of the. I hate forms. I always have. It's something I've never got on with because the tendency is not so bad when you've got one or two items that you just need to put in there. I mean, if you want to connect with somebody on the internet, it's very, very, very easy. However, there does seem to me, once you actually go down this particular sort of route of wanting to do anything with property, you start filling in forms. And there just seems to be an endless array of them. Now, some of them are important, and some of them will contain important content. However, the Law Society has come up with this wondrous new one, which has got everybody baffled, including the lawyers that it never spoke to, when it was actually sort of deciding what should go into the form. And it's just a whole bunch of bafflement for people to interpret, because once you start it then goes through the process. And I think we've got some interesting sort of some interesting colleagues today to discuss this very thing, because they have got to look at forms and understand the forms. And I don't know who starts the form rolling. Who does start the form rolling?
All right. Well, I'm just going to throw Juliet in there. Juliet, what's all this nonsense about forms?
Well, the forms, the new property information forms, they're supposed to facilitate the flow of information from the marketing stage to the legals. Is it, or do they really do that? I mean, the first thing that a lawyer is going to tell you is when you get on the website, the versions of the forms that are available are specimen forms. So you've got to go to a third party to actually get the correct forms, which means paying some money to do so. So it seems to be some sort of money-making exercise.
Oh, not again.
It seems to be a layer of complexity. They've added on this additional layer of complexity, which means that you potentially will have more misrepresentation claims, and you will have increased PI insurance sums for conveyances. So I'm not quite sure that it does what it says on the tin. And the key thing, as Hamish said, was that somebody was very keen on digitalization, didn't consult with the conveyances. So how do you introduce a tool to help the process when the very people who are involved in the process aren't consulted? That, I think, is the biggest hiccup of all time.
Mitchell, it seems like yet another avoidable speed bump has been placed in our path. And on top of that, apparently, it's about the length of the Magna Carta.
Yes. I echo the thoughts of Hamish and Juliet. It's another form. Is it necessarily needed? No. Is it a money-making exercise? Probably. I think if there's good professionals in place, you don't need it. But I think what also the industry is seeing is there's not enough good professionals in place. So from what I understand, especially the TA6 is putting a lot of the onus on the seller of the property, more so than the solicitor. I think there may be a reduction in PI claims, because you can then make a claim against the vendor, which I think you can do anyway, if I remember from my years in agency years ago. And I think as long as the vendor and the agent are doing a good job in being honest about the property, and disclosing all the faults and all the positives, then it's a pointless form, but it could work.
Right. That was what we call in the trade stacked if. Rowan, what's all this nonsense about form? Please.
I think actually, I think the form. The form becomes relevant anyway at the point of conveyancing, right? So I think what's new for estate agents is that we, in my whole career, 20-year career, we've always done a kind of a property fact find, where we were using a questionnaire to find out what we think is relevant. And now this form's come along and said, well, actually, this is all the information that you should be providing to a buyer, or a buyer should have access to. So this obviously part A, you need to provide it. Part B and C should be available if they kind of ask questions, need to find out. And the TA6, I think, was something that solicitors were always having to do at the beginning of a conveyancing process. So I kind of don't see why agents shouldn't be doing the TA6 at the beginning of the process, because it's just there available. But I think my aggravation with it is, I haven't ever read how many questions there are, but I think when it came out and people were arguing about it, some estate agent popped up and said, it's like 6,400 words in the TA6. There's 180 questions. And the problem with that is, no matter what the seller says, there's still an onus on agents to then do due diligence and make sure those answers are correct. So, for example, in Section C, we should be saying, Section C, Part A, Part B or Part C, we should be able to tell a buyer which side of a fence, which side of the garden is the boundary. Do we own the left side of the left-hand fence or the right-hand fence? I don't necessarily think that's particularly material information that is really relevant in a sale pro. No, we're just trying to, we're trying to market stuff, and we're salespeople. We want to get people excited about living there. And actually, whether it's the left fence or the right fence doesn't particularly matter. Even if one's knocked down, it doesn't overly matter. Point is, if a seller says it's the left side of the garden, that's our fence. There's still an onus on the agent to check land registry and make sure that they're telling the truth. So it doesn't really matter what the sellers say, because actually the onus is still on us. So there is still an ability to bring a claim against an agent for not checking that what the seller said is right in this 6,400 word essay that we're presented with.
Hamish, is it just a money-making exercise yet again?
I don't know. It's done my brain in. I'm just glad I don't need to fill the darn thing. I didn't actually realise that it was up to the likes of Rowan, for example, to check this stuff out. So, as he said about this massive great essay, of the good news is, I suppose, there's only 25 pages telling you how the form needs to be filled in. So that's bound to help somebody. But I don't see, and I think Juliet sort of hit on it as well. And of course, the interesting thing is, all three of us, because Mitchell requires information to actually judge whether this property is something which they're willing to put money towards. Some of the information is going to be relative to him, but what? I mean, they haven't actually really. Who the heck did they consult the Law Society when they came upon this massive missile of sort of goodness knows what information that you could answer so much of it with not as far as is known. How much of that's going to come out in the form?
It seems incredible. I mean, Juliet, there seems enough complexity in all this anyway. Aren't we just adding to it?
We are. I mean, to be honest, in the example that Rowan gave, if you've got the requirement to maintain the fence at the right or the left, is that going to dissuade you from buying the property? I think not. The reality is, you open yourself up to claims, because if the information on that form is incorrect, it is potentially misrepresentation. And you're going to have a purchaser who's going to be like, oh, you know what, I can make some money out of this. I can claim on Rowan's PI because he actually misrepresented to me, irrespective of not suffering loss. And I think that's the problem. So in English law, we've got the caveat emptor, which is the buyer beware. And so these forms were created so that the buyer could be informed and fully informed. But there are just certain things that you're not going to be aware of and you're going to need to take news on, etc. I mean, what happens when the seller says, I don't know on everything? You know, or do you get a solicitor involved? And that's the idea, getting a solicitor involved earlier on in the process. But the reality is that's going to cost you. A solicitor is going to go through those forms with you, but it's their time and it's going to cost. So what do you think you're saving in terms of process by creating this questionnaire and having it done earlier on? It is sort of affecting negatively in other ways, which will include costs and complexity. And I'm not saying that this information, just as you've said, Rowan, this information will come out at some stage of the process, but is it really necessary at the marketing stage that early on, when in fact that information might be subject to change? So what you will find is people giving answers and caveating those answers or carving out those answers to say, you know, I'm not responsible or I'm not liable, something to that effect. Again, it defeats the purpose. So, you know, what are we really trying to achieve? You know, I'd always say, like in Italy or certain parts of Europe, when you're buying a house, you see the house, you go to the notary, you make an offer, the notary signs up, you get a stamp, and the property is yours, and it is as seen. No checks, no nothing. So we have complicated the processes. I mean, you know, all of these additional searches that you need, sometimes, you know, someone will want a highway search, for example, and that's an additional cost. I mean, can you not tell whether the road abuts the public highway, etc.? And there are properties which are in built-up zones you can actually tell, and you may not need that sort of search. But we've elongated the process and I think made it more complicated than it needs to be.
Mitchell, have we created a bloated system that just costs the buyer more money?
I think we've created a bloated system which costs everyone more money. Yeah, absolutely. I think more than just buyers, vendors as well are paying out more on legal fees. Estate agents will be paying out more on training, or, you know, if not for training, for extra staff who are trained for the sales progression to handle all of it rather than the sales negs.
I thought there was all the inexorable rise of the computer and its ability to amass data and information. This is all supposed to make things easier for us, but it just seems to be covering everything in a layer of mist rather than making things transparent.
We could start talking about conspiracy theories if you like, but probably a different podcast. It's too complicated, and then when it gets to lenders as well, there's an awful lot of lenders who, especially in this industry, there's well over 300 lenders, and a lot of lenders who aren't necessarily knowledgeable on the existing TA6s anyway, and this is going to confuse them more, going to cost them more in legal fees. But before,
surely if the lenders aren't buying into its existence, it serves no purpose.
Exactly that, but it gets worse than that, because if the lenders aren't buying into it, then it makes them more wary on every transaction, which is obviously worse for the borrowers, and therefore worse for all the professionals and the seller. So it's, yeah.
It leaves it only to you, Rowan, to give us some light at the end of the tunnel. Remembering, of course, that light at the end of the tunnel might be an oncoming train. But
I don't know. Well, what light at the end of the tunnel can I give you? I think what I would say, I don't actually, in principle, I don't see that there's a massive issue in gathering information that is useful for buyers. If they really want to know which side of the garden they own, it's good to have that information to provide and be able to look at something and reference it, right? So it's not really a problem. It just never gets asked. I think my issue is really petty. Is that estate agents are just salespeople, right? We're not even professionals. We're not qualified. We're selling something, and we shouldn't misrepresent it. But it's a sales process. It's a sales job, and actually, the sellers at the time are excited and they're emotional, and it's like it's all part of this dream that's coming together. And actually, then they get bombarded with 6,400 words of kind of gibberish that it kind of just takes the the sort of the fun out of the beginning of the process, where it suddenly becomes arduous rather than exciting. And that is petty. It's a petty reason to dislike the thing. But nevertheless, as an estate agent, as a career estate agent, it takes the kind of the glow off it.
Right. Hamish, I have to bring us all to order shortly. But before I do that, what do you see overall as the direction of travel? Is this the sign at the gates of dawn? Is this the thing that's saying this is the way it's all going to become? It's all going to become an enormous box ticking exercise with a bill at the end of it.
Well, I do think there is that. There's a serious element of that involved with it. But one of the things that concerns me, prior to land registry, sorry to bring up the subject because nobody's mentioned it yet.
No.
Prior to land registry being passed over the control of land charges, there was basically a consultation amongst the professionals, at which point 93% suggested it was a bad idea. So the Conservative government introduced it on the back end of some other kind of bill of change, and it became law. Now here we have over 75% of lawyers suggesting that this is not the appropriate form. So what the heck? I mean, that's far fewer, isn't it? There's far fewer against this than were against the introduction of sort of land charges and land reg. So the thing to me, and I mean, Rowan's picked on the subject completely correct. And what we know is you work with your right partner. Rowan's going to set you up to get your property onto the market with the appropriate information. And he's got 20 years experience. He knows what he's doing. He's going to help guide you through it. If you work with Ben, you're working with a solicitor, with a lawyer, with somebody with experience with sort of Juliet. She's going to actually help, whether you're buying or selling, she's going to be helping with the response relative sort of to that. And between them, Mitchell's going to end up with the right information to make a decision on whether that property should go through. And none of those people have been consulted with in compiling this particular form.
This is always I've seen in so many walks of life. It's some do-gooding group of people who have decided they want to help people out by grabbing loads of information. Somebody else along the line said, "Now we've done that, let's charge them for it." I can see that there was a great idea at the inception of this, but I think perhaps the way in which it's manifested is more clunky and less helpful. But it is what we do. What I would say is a big thank you so much to Juliet Baboolal, Hamish McLay, our extra special guests today, Mitchell Bellenie, and of course Rowan Waller. I've been Gareth Wax, many purple hats. We do this every week, good Lord, every Thursday at around 10 o'clock. You should find us all grouping together and talking in hushed tones about what the goods and the bads and the in-betweens of the property industry. We'll be here next week. There'll be Property Matters tomorrow with Hamish McLay. Please watch out for that around 2ish. And what I would say is try and focus on all the positives, because goodness only knows there are some. We try and find out the iniquities of the property industry, but we also try and bring to light some of the excellent parts of it too. So, and knowledge, as Juliet will tell you, is power. So the more information that we can get you, the more able you are to do better at this. We're not advisors. We are here just as commentators. So with that, I wish you all a wonderful week, what little there is left, and of course, great mental health. Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Bye all.